Hey guys, OGalbina here, bringing you guys another Draft League discussion video. Today we're going to be doing something we've done before on the channel, but it's been, I think, a couple years since the last time we did it, and we kind of recycle a lot of these Twitter questions as, the format evolves and players get better, and, we learn new things. But today, essentially what we're going to do is we are going to take a look at a bunch of Draft League veterans' takes on one piece of advice they would give to someone just starting out playing Pokemon Draft League. The format has exploded over the last couple years and gotten so much bigger, and with Pokemon Champions coming out, I imagine it's only going to get bigger from there. So I figured this is a great place to see people who have been playing the format for upwards of 10 years in some cases, what they think that you should kind of know, or how you should approach certain things in regards to getting better in the format. So if you guys do enjoy today's video, be sure to drop a like on the vid as well as subscribe to the channel. We're on our way to 10,000 subs by the end of the year. It's a lofty goal. We're pretty far away, so I need your help in order to get there. That being said, let's jump into it. Now, a lot of these we're going to skim over in the sense of like they've been said multiple times, things of the sort, or, there are some joke ones. I could see one 3 tweets down that's like a little bit more of a joke, so we'll skim past those ones. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to take a look at all the advice everybody has given, and I think all of it is, literally all of it, besides the joke ones, are great advice for you as a player. But I think there's some things I disagree with, or some slight aspects of tweets that I disagree with, and I'll be sure to let you guys know that, because I'm not just going to be like, yeah, this person's right, if I don't necessarily think that it's 100% the case. Obviously, with respect and big thank you to everybody who commented on this thread, but I think there might be better ways to word a couple of these things to a newer player, if that makes any sense. But yeah, that being said, first up we have Galvin here saying, my piece of advice would be not to overthink things in prep. Most of the games that I've got my ass beat in are games I spent the most time building for and prepping. Teams I've thrown together right before teams I've thrown together right before I've played in some of the best performing teams I've built. I don't know if this is kind of an example of that. I don't know if this is necessarily the correct way of looking at this. I don't think it is a correlation of like low effort means team is better. I think not overthinking your build is a good piece of advice, though. Sometimes a simple answer is just there. Say I'm playing into a matchup where my opponent has no ground resist. Choice Scarf Lando T might just be the move. Maybe I don't need to position an SD Salic Endure set to win the game. Maybe I just come in and click Earthquake the whole game, and I build my game plan around that, right? So in that regard, I do agree. I don't think that low effort builds, or like, not even the low effort, like rush teams right before you play, are going to consistently perform better than teams that you really sink a lot of time into, but I do think that not overthinking your builds is a very valuable thing. Next up, we have Shuckle King here saying, have a flowchart of your game plan and stick to it besides an emergency. Know in your head and you know your lead and how to react accordingly. Ideally, you have the first 7 to 8 turns scoped out, but that comes with practice. You can practice it by laddering with an RMT team on the OU ladder. Yeah, I think there's a couple really good points in this. I think a really important thing of Pokemon Draft League that you see a lot of people maybe not do super well in their games, even when you watch like games on YouTube and things of the sort, people will go in the lead and they'll be like, all right, they'll see team preview and they'll be like, all right, what are we leading? What do we think we should lead here? And I think if you're doing that, you're already behind, right? You should go in knowing this is what I'm leading. Now, sometimes it can vary. You could say, okay, 90% of the time I'm leading this Pokemon. However, if I see this one-off Pokemon on the team, I have to lead this, right? That's totally fine as well. It doesn't have to be 100% set in stone, but you should have a very, very concrete idea of what you are going to lead and how your opponent is going to lead and how you are going to react accordingly. You can lead. So say again, let's go in the Lando T scenario. Say Lando T is my best lead humanly possible. Again, you learn these things from practicing and playing and things like that. But say I identify that my best lead is Lando T. I know that if they lead their Heatran, I have free rocks because they're going to switch out. I plan that in my head, right? Unless they're Balloon, then, again, we still kind of play around. But say they just lead a regular Heatran, I have my rocks. Sick. Say they lead off with a Milotic, something that Lando T doesn't necessarily immediately threaten. We can get burned. We can get O-Code by Ice Beam. That's fine. That doesn't mean my lead is bad. My lead doesn't need to beat everything, but I need to have a concrete plan into everything. If my lead is Lando T, I need to be ready for the possibility of that competitive Milotic leading into me and putting on a lot of pressure. What is my switch in to said competitive Milotic if I lead my Lando, right? So it's not that your lead has to beat everything, but you need to know what you're doing with your lead so you're not frazzled and making the incorrect play in the actual game itself. And if, again, you find a position where you're like, okay, if I lead this Lando in a competitive Milotic, I'm really screwed, and that's really bad for me. I don't have a play path out of that early. Then you don't lead Lando anymore, and you have to find a better lead, right? So I think that's very, very important. I think using an OU team is, or using like a solid OU team too, is a great way of practicing as well. 7-8 turns scoped out. I think that's also fair, especially for games you're really, really preparing for ahead of time. But I wouldn't set that goal for yourself really early on in your draft league career. I really think keying down on that lead will make the game so much easier and much more approachable for yourself. Next up, we have Clyde's here saying pick Gramble Gas round 1. So true. But okay, real talk, don't obsess over the type chart in your chat, like the one on the prep chart. If you have 3 fairy weeks but 2 resists, it's fine as long as the resists are good. I'm not like a true veteran though. No, I think this is a great point though, regardless of how long you've played. I think this is a great point. Very often I'll see people look at a team, they'll be like, this team is bad. It has, 4 ground weaknesses or something of the sort. And then you'll look and you'll be like, wow, but their ground resists are elite. They have Lando T, they have a Tango. Like, there's no ground type that immediately threatens this team because of the fact that they have 2 great Pokemon to check them. Even Pokemon that don't conventionally resist ground, but like resist it, right? Say I have a Lando T and say I have a Slowbro, which is a great check to 90% of physical grounds, right? Or I have Lando T Slowking, right? Special grounds, Slowking covers, physical grounds, Lando covers. So are we even without a true resistance, we're not super weak to the ground typing in general. Now, again, you have to keep in mind the pressure that exerts and, more things come from there, but don't be afraid to be like, okay, well, these 2 Pokemon are both weak to ground. I can't get another ground weak Pokemon because it doesn't fit no matter what. And I'm sure other people talk about this later, but don't be afraid to double up on typings. If Pokemon have different roles, then the typing doesn't matter, in that regard, as long as you have the proper apt resistances and switches to the things that beat said typing. So it's a good point from Clyde here. I really like that one. Very good one. Next up, we have Liv here saying, learn good note-taking. At face value, people probably think, but Showdown tells me that. Wrong. Take notes on damage rolls, speed creeps you win or lose at, and any other things to sleuth and EV spread. Wi-Fi kids often need more like move/ability/item details, but it's the same principle. Yeah, I know a lot of people that either use like a note-taking dock on the computer or like a physical notepad. I've been doing that this season actually for SPL. Because it's VGC and there's a lot more information a lot quicker. I obviously used it for like Vancouver regionals, which is what all the papers are in there right now are for, so I can't actually show my notes for that. It's actually just the regional notes that I had, like a lot of Okos that Rayquaza got, which is funny. But yeah, no, I think this is totally fair, right? It lets you keep things clear, concise, directly right in front of you, and I think this is a good idea. I think this is something that Draft League players could learn from VGC players because they take great notes. I always say, I think it's crazy how Wolfie does his videos pretty much on recreations of him taking notes of his own games. I play Pokemon a lot. I don't know how he takes such detailed notes and still plays well. Like, it's pretty crazy. I don't think it has to be to that level, but like, hey, this dies, or like writing down that this has burned its item, this showed booster speed, this showed, whatever it might be. I think that's a really good tip from Liv here. King L5, debatably one of the greatest drafting players of all time. Let's see, I'm sure he has something really, really important to say right here. Bravery without forethought causes a man to fight blindly and desperately like a mad bull. Such an opponent must not be encountered with brute force, but may be lured into an ambush and slain. Wow. You know what? I think that's so self-explanatory and so easy, I'm not even going to explain it. I mean, this is why they pay him the big bucks, man. This is why he's the king. King L5 or L5 King, which is, I didn't know that was the Twitter ad. That's hella funny. All right, next up we have Ethan here saying take broken stuff first. Being flexible is a trap if you use cheap, and you can use cheap stuff later as a glue. Yeah, I think someone else mentions it later. There's 100% going to be leagues that you join that have Pokemon priced too low, and you're like, oh wow, this is a steal, right? Let's try and think of an example. Let's say, this is a very extreme example. Say Starmie was in Scarlet and Violet, and say you were playing in the BBR run by me, and say I was like, dude, Starmie is freaking terrible. No, actually, hold on. Let's do a real example. Say Alola is underpriced. You're playing in BBR, run by me, right? You see Alola is very, very underpriced. You're like, wow, I can't believe Owen's an idiot and put it in 6. He's really committing to the bit of not liking Aloe. I'm going to take it super, super early because I think that's a steal. Well, you might be right, while that might be a steal, while something might be low, you are foregoing a round 1 pick in doing so, right? We saw that happen with Who, and while Who is an incredible player, and he's playing really well this season of the UBR, by the way, like they're going to do good regardless because they're very good at the game. Their team itself is not as good as it could be, not even close, and I'm sure Who would tell you that as well, and they also did it for the bit. I'm not saying they did it too. They were like, this is the 100%, you know, objective value pick that I grab right here. But I think it's a good example of something being low price, someone grabbing it early, and then being like, oh shit, where's my good Pokemon? Especially in Generation 9, where there's so many crazy top tier power crep Pokemon, foregoing that for like a middle tier value kind of mon that you think is really good and you want, just simply isn't worth it in 99% of instances. So I think this is a great take from Ethan. I think someone else here says it later. Next up, we have the GOAT, Carpy, saying, if you care about your reputation or getting into big leagues, quality over quantity. For those who want to reach the next level, either competition or content, your resume will look a lot better with 5 positive finishes rather than 20 even or negative finishes. I agree 100%. This is something that I've struggled with throughout my draft league career like crazy. I think from a content perspective, I totally feel this. Like my Smogon Tour performances last year. The first year of Smogon Tours, I performed really well at all of the individual tournaments, made videos of them, they all did good. Last year, I had a lot on my plate in regards to content and other leagues and things like that I was trying to do, that in a majority of my Smogon Tour Cup, like individual tour finishes, I didn't play good. I mean, I didn't make brackets in a lot of them. I was like, wow. To where this year, I'm kind of focusing like, okay, the games and leagues that I'm playing, the tournaments that I'm playing, we are locking in. We are super, super sweating those leagues. And as frustrating and as kind of boring as it can get sometimes, because you want to play Pokemon Draft League, or if you're playing in 1 or 2 things and you lose in them, that sucks, right? It's kind of like the allure of playing in 5 or 6 things at once. You know, it really lets you hone in, focus on getting actually better and kind of building up that image of yourself as a good player if you are trying to get into the bigger parts of the scene, whether it be on the content side, on Wi-Fi, or on the showdown, like competition side, the DPL, DCLs, and things like that. I think that's something that really hurt me in the last year and a half in particular. And I think this is a great take from Kurt. Really lock in and focus on what you, your 1 or 2 leagues. I'd say 1 or 2 maximum when you're starting. Focus in, lock in on those, and you'll do great. I mean, when I won BBL this last season, it was literally just me super sweating BBL, taking 20, 30 mocks for 1 league. Now, you don't have to be that extreme. I'm a little bit OD for that. But I think it's a good example of, hey, you lock in, you do really well, you see the results. So, good take from Kurt. Next up here, I hope you guys didn't hear that. My computer's going doo-doo-doo. Next up, though, we have Burger here, another great player, saying, I've seen a lot of comments about having a game plan for the first couple turns, which is important, but you shouldn't start thinking about that until you actually know what you want to win with, and what you have to stop your opponent from with winning. Find your win conditions and lose conditions and prep, and then adjust accordingly your early game plan to accomplish these tasks. An early game plan means nothing if you don't know what your end goal is. These factors are also really important to identify a game plan. If you get a super offensive build, your early game plan is way different than a balanced build and shouldn't require as much early sequencing. The way you build around your team is much more important than building turns 1 to 3. I agree 100%. I think both are important, obviously, but you have to have the apt and proper game plan if you want to play out those turns in the way you want, right? And again, I think that does kind of come with what type of build you're leading with or you're playing with. If you're playing hyper offense, very often you're leading an offensive piece of your screens and you're steering from there and trying to overwhelm your opponent. But if you're running a super fat stall build, you're going to make sure you have the app switch-ins, have the app counterplay. You have to also, again, I think identifying how I'm going to win, how I can lose is super important. Actually, when I help people build for like that Salamence tier membership that we have here, I always have people tell me how they want to win, how their opponent is going to want to win, or what's the most scary way for them in the build that they identify their opponent can win with, and how they lead to kind of facilitate that. So I think this is a great take from Burger here, making sure you aren't facilitating your opponent's win conditions, making sure you're putting your win condition together. Say you have one Pokemon on the field that maybe doesn't beat the Pokemon on the other side of it, but you know if you attack. Okay, let's try it. We're going to just keep using Lando T. Say there's a Pokemon on the other side of the field. You don't beat it 1v1. It's Milotic. It's FizzDef Milotic. But you know your win condition in the back is a Bullet Punch Mega Scizor, or Bullet Punch Scizor at +2. While you might not kill the Milotic from full, you might be in a position where you're like, okay, if I get this 40, 50, 60% off on this Milotic, my endgame with Scizor is here because I can sack my Landorus, go into something that forces the Milo out, and then I just need to position SD and not let the Milo recover back up. So that's kind of the idea of like, how do I facilitate my win conditions? And that means that sometimes it's like understanding like, okay, I can sack health on this in order to push this end game a little bit better. So good take from Burger here. I know Burger told me too, he plans on potentially making another video on this thread and going a little bit more in depth on ones that he doesn't necessarily agree with and kind of like giving his own thoughts and things like that. So be sure to check out Burger as well. He makes great content. Next up, we have JB Westside saying, sack the win con turn 3 and a poor attempt to flex. It's so true. Stunt or die, right? Why are you playing Draft League if you're not stunting? There's no point. There's just no point. Next up, we have Gravy here saying, make sure to watch games back, win or lose, with someone more experienced. If you know someone, but by yourself is also fine. Make notes, learn from mistakes, and from your opponent. Also, don't be afraid to lose. It's part of the process, and don't just get disheartened as it makes you bitter. For what it's worth, this also goes for anyone stuck in a rut. Some of my best seasons have come after I've watched games where I've been doing well, and then when I've been struggling and seeing what I did then and not now. Make adjustments and then see how it goes. Usually means more risks too. I don't know about the usually means more risks. I'm a big risk assessment guy, and I guess if we could talk about that later a little bit. But I do 1,000,000,000% agree with the fact of watching your own games back. In particular, when you lose. It is so easy to watch the replays when you win. Hell yeah, I'm watching my game where I won. Dude, I 4-0'd. I'm watching this shit 3 times before I go to bed tonight. However, when you lose, it's not as easy, right? But there's a reason you lost, right? There's a reason you got your ass beat. Let's watch back, completely analyze it. And I think the big thing too, when you're watching back in your games, is don't be so immediate to jump on, okay, well, this happened and I got unlucky, so that's why I lost. Probably not. Very seldom. No, it does happen, but not as often as you think would you lose completely because of hacks. Now, it could have sealed the game or put you in a position where you would have won and you lost because of the hacks. But what I'm saying is very often we can put ourselves in better positions to where that wouldn't matter. And I think you can only do so by really sitting back and analyzing your game. Really, really going back and being like, okay, I might have gotten unlucky here, but this is how I played this incorrectly. And this scenario wouldn't have come up regardless. And I think that don't be afraid to lose is a big thing. It's something I always talk about, super struggle with it. I think especially this is great for young content creators. It's probably my biggest, one of the things I'm really, really terrible about is losing. I don't like losing. I'm so a loser. It sucks. And it's very, especially if you're uploading it for the world to see, it can be very, very, very embarrassing. At least, I mean, for me personally, it can feel very, very embarrassing. You're putting, out a process or out some content that you've worked very hard on. People know you've worked hard on the build, then you just get your ass beat. It's very, very, it can feel very disheartening, but it is how you get better. If we won all the time, it wouldn't be fun, right? There's no point in winning all the time. The losses is what makes the wins worthwhile. And you're only going to get better from losing and recognizing, okay, this is where I screwed up. This is how I don't do so next time. So I think this is an overall great post from Gray here. Next up, we have Davey on here saying, I don't know if I'm considered a vet. I feel like you're probably considered a vet. You've been around for a minute. My advice has and always will be, Pokemon's a game of random events. While playing, don't be scared to take risks and stray away from your game plan. Crit happens, hacks happens. Sometimes you gotta make plays. So I do agree in the sense of like, you need to be flexible, right? We've talked a lot already so far about kind of understanding your game plan, understanding your build process, or taking the build process very, very serious. And really having your game mapped out. That's not to say things are going to go to plan. 99.9% of the time, they are not. You're going to have to adjust and make plays and, you go from there. Sometimes you're going to get unlucky. Crits happen, hacks happen. Sometimes you got to make plays. 100%. Again, I am a big, big risk assessment guy, though. I think that the best players in the format ever hardly make very many hard reads because they can usually control the game state. And even the plays that they're making are mid-ground doubles, mid-ground predictions and things of the sort to where they don't have to. I don't like letting my opponent's play decide the way the game goes, right? Now, obviously, that isn't always the case. You can't always do so. But I think understanding, okay, if I make this play, me getting it wrong, does this put me in a terrible adverse position to where I can't really fight back from her? It's going to be really hard. If the answer is yes, and the opposite question of do I need to make this play to win is no, very often my personal philosophy is don't make the play. Now, if you're in a position where either you can make the play, get it wrong, and still be okay, or I need to make this play right, or I lose, it just comes down to that 50-50, quote unquote. Hell yeah, let it rip, Sometimes you got to get the double right. And if you don't, then shit, you lose. That's how it is. But I think understanding risk assessment is really important, though. Next up, we have Leo here saying, look into your opponent and not just the matchup on paper. Team building is important, but you can also find out how your opponent plays or how they tend to build from watching their games and video. Any information is valuable. Yes, again, this kind of leans back, though. I disagree on part of this, at least to like an extreme level. I think any information is valuable is 1000% true, especially if you're playing on, in the YouTube scene like myself a lot of the time. You can watch and you play a lot of the same people and you see that they're uploading their games. You can see building tendencies, you can see play tendencies, things of the sort. However, I don't like making a game plan predicated on how my opponent will build or play. I don't like taking that, I don't like taking the game state or like the way the game is going to flow out of my own hands and having it rely on how my opponent is going to play. But I think understanding, hey, they very often do this, so I need to be ready for this, is definitely really fair, right? Someone we always talk about is Viz, great player. Viz builds his teams from information I have gathered from talking to him and playing him many times at this point. Viz builds his teams right before he plays, and everything is max. Everything is 252, 252, which is crazy, by the way. I think Viz would be like, if Viz like sat down and just like became a draft sweat and like really sat down and grinded his builds, I think he'd smoke everybody. I mean, he's rolling up and like winning leagues and smoking most people in the Wi-Fi scene on like 15-minute builds with like no EV forethought, which is pretty crazy. But I'm also not going to build my game plan specifically around, okay, I know Viz goes hyper offense typically, I think he's going to bring this set and I'm going to play specifically around it. I think that's kind of setting yourself up for a bad time, but gaining information, kind of like recognize, okay, this is what my opponent does, or this is what they did last time we played because we're playing in playoffs right now, is definitely good. Next up, we have Keegan with probably one of the best tweets in this thread. The simple answer is almost always the right answer. Yeah, we overthink things all the time as draft league players. It's almost like the idea of like you're taking a test, right? And you put down, you're like, okay, number 4 is B. You put down B. You're going back through and you're like, is it B? It might be D. It might be C. Most of the time, your first gut instinct is the correct answer. It's kind of like a test-taking skill that you learn in school, is usually just stick with your gut in the first answer. Typically, that's going to be the case in draft league. Again, risk assessment, understanding, okay, I could see my opponent make a switch out here on my Lando T Earthquake because they have it in their heat trend. They might switch in their ground resist. But does it matter? Am I in a bad spot if they do? No. Am I in a bad spot if they don't and they hard read me U-turning, I get flame bodied, rocks go up for free, or Magma Storm comes out, like am I screwed in that instance? Yes? Alright, I'm an Earthquake then, right? They can switch, but we can adjust accordingly. Next up, we have Marcus here saying 10 years in, he's so old. Draft with game plans in mind over checklist. Yeah, make sure your draft is cohesive and flows together. Plan options and scenarios early/late, knowing that they will not occur exactly as intended. Yeah, you gotta be able to adjust, but still try and find the same endgame path. Don't hesitate to use instincts at endgames, but try to understand every consequence. Yeah, know your calcs, 100%. I think knowing your calcs is actually a good one. A lot of people don't, but if you're preparing aptly, having to sit, turn, look at the calc, type in every little thing, it's going to just completely disrupt your flow state. You can like see that you should at least know like boosting item damage, right? If you don't see life orb and you see it do like 15% more than you know, you're like, okay, banded, maybe not freaking out as much, right? Or you could see like, that's no special attack investment, like, things like that. Know your calcs, have fun, ball out, hell yeah, good stuff. Next up, we have A12 here saying, don't be afraid to go against the norm and embrace the chaos of a match. It's good to have a general game plan pre-match, but be prepared to throw that game plan out the window on preview if necessary. And don't be too invested in your gameplay. Don't be too invested in it so your gameplay isn't rigid and predictable. I don't know if I agree with this. I'll be honest, I don't know if I agree with this. I think if you have a proper game plan, it doesn't matter what your opponent brings. You have a set of maximum 11 Pokemon in the Wi-Fi scene, maximum 8 Pokemon that you can pick from, or in the showdown scene, maximum 8 Pokemon that you can pick from in that scene in a game. You should be able to make a very cohesive game plan on paper, regardless of the 6 that your opponent brings. And very often, if your game plan is covering the scariest things, if they bring a random Munchlax, that doesn't change your game plan because they're bringing a Pokemon that is worse value-wise. So I don't agree. I think what you can take away from this tweet here is be flexible. Sometimes things aren't going to go your way. Sometimes your opponent is going to read your game plan and completely stop you, right? That's totally fair. But I don't think the whole like throw your game plan out the window and do your own thing, I don't think that's going to lead to consistent success for most people. I think A12 is a little bit of an anomaly when it comes to draft league though. That guy's the GOAT. Next up, we have Henry here saying retire. So true. But don't think you could do 5 leagues at once. That will put you on the fast lane to burnout. 100%. We talked about with Kurt, quality over quantity. 100%. In a point drop, don't be afraid to nuke points early if certain ones fall to you. There's always low point ways to fill in cracks. Yeah, top heavy is the move, baby. I mean, they're up there for a reason. If good Pokemon are there, very often, I'll see people like leave a really broken mon on the board, like in round 3 that should have gone like round 1, round 2, because they're like, it doesn't fit my team. We can figure it out, man. If something broken is still there, if there's for some reason a round 3 Great Tusk, draft the round 3 Great Tusk. It's okay if you got 2 grounds, man. We'll lock in and figure it out. Like, draft the broken mons. So yeah, I think that's actually a great take here from Henry. Next up, we have K2 Slay here saying, don't follow the Fairy Dragon Steel Firewater Grass Core checklist. I used to think it's a decent guide, but now I think it's a crippling habit where people will draft weaker teams just to fill those cores and then go, amazing team X is bad because it has no dragon. Yeah, I think the idea of like your Dragon Fairy Steel Core, Firewater Grass Core is good to a new player. And I wouldn't necessarily say if you're just starting out, don't do it, right? You're playing in a new league, you're a newer player. I think drafting is fine because the reason those cores were like always promoted before is because those typings pair really well together defensively and offensively in the Fairy Dragon Steel case, right? So they check each other's weaknesses very well. What you should do is take that information and be like, okay, maybe we don't need to be so rigid with it, but we need to make sure that we're covering our bases defensively and we have common resistances for our Pokemon on our team. If you go too rigid with Firewater Grass and you're drafting your grass type solely as a ground check, but you have a Buzzwole on your team, and you're like, okay, well, I don't really need grass to resist Buzzwole. I have X Pokemon for waters. Why do I need a shitty grass type? You don't, right? So I think take the idea of make sure you have common resistances on your team, so where you can switch into common offensive typings that might give you trouble, but don't be rigid and I need this typing, this typing, this typing, this typing, this typing, this typing. And same thing, don't be afraid to draft double. You know, if you have 2 water types or 2 dragon types or 2 ground types, that's probably fine in a lot of instances. So yeah, good take from K2 here. Next up, we have J. Ricky here, saying early game is incredibly important and is perhaps the only part of the game that you can really control. Make sure you have a clear lead going into the battle and map out early sequences so you know what to do in most scenarios. First few turns set up the tempo of the battle. Did he put something else? Oh no, it's just someone agreeing with him. 100%. And we talked about the lead metagame so much. I think that is something that really takes like new players to like start understanding the game. It really helps them out a ton. Have your lead in your mind. You need to know 1 to 2 Pokemon that are going to lead. One that's going to lead 90% of the time, and maybe like, and again, that second, the 1 to 2, that second Mon in that scenario isn't even the case in most instances. But yeah. Next up, we have Scribble here saying, please take from the top of the draft board in the first 2 to 3 rounds of the draft. On any standard draft board, the top Pokemon are at the top for a reason, and you're hurting yourself by going for value picks too early. Talked about it before. 100% the take. Get the Great Tusk, man. Just draft the Great Tusk, please. We don't need to draft. I know Terra Iron Crown might be 4 points too low in your mind. Don't take the round 1 Iron Crown. Take the Great Tusk. Maybe you could get a round 2, but you need to get the top end guys if they're available. Next up, we have Jaber here saying, be confident in your abilities. Your ideas can be correct, and you shouldn't always default to taking other people's opinions. In the same vein, you must listen to other opinions and try to gather why they have those opinions. Yeah, I mean, it's great to get advice from other people, right? It's great to get advice from people who are better than you. I'm 100% a believer in this. I do it all the time. I always ask for advice from people who are better and more experienced than me. With BBL, it was a ton with L5. I think I grew a ton as a player. And with SBL, I've asked J-Bear in particular, as a great doubles player, or Hopeless, a ton of advice. Raising is another guy in that front office. They know more than me. But at the same time, I'm not afraid to be like, okay, I don't necessarily agree with you. This is why I'm going to keep trying for this. You have to make sure you have an open mind to listen to other people's opinions, but you also have to be capable of discerning good advice from bad advice. And sometimes people just aren't going to be right in the advice that they give you, and you have to be able to make that delineation. So, yeah. Next up, we have Ellie here saying, always have a game plan. What you lead with on the following few turns will decide the outcome of the battle. And we'll stop drafting Corviknight. That Pokemon is dog shit. We've talked about the lead in the first few turn sequences a ton today. It's kind of like the main takeaway. 100% agree. And I also 100% agree on Corviknight being a terrible Pokemon. Please stop drafting it. J. Ricky. I forgot to like this one. But yeah, I think that's definitely an important aspect. Next up, we have Fury here. I almost said Furry. We have Fury here saying, even a lot of experienced players struggle with this. But Hack's obsession is an incredibly unhealthy mindset. Blaming Hacks entirely for a loss and ignoring everything else will not only limit what you learn, but more importantly, just kill the fun of the game for you. Yeah, 100%. We talked about it before. While Hacks can decide games, 100% solely say there are definitely instances where you can play completely perfectly and get super cheesed on a super important turn and lose the game, right? I think freeze is a big proponent of this. Like, getting frozen very often is not something you can play around. But very, very often, I say 99% of the time, when you lost because of hacks, you also could have taken the proper play path to avoid said hacks. I think a good example of this is Keegan right now. Keegan is actually, despite being, I don't know what his active record is in like what's been uploaded in BBR. I think he's 2-2, I want to say, or he's 1-2. I don't know. Regardless, the first 2 games of the season, he lost. The first game, it was due to a crit. Right, he got crit on his crocodile by a scarf iron boulder from who would have won the game. Definitely got unlucky. Would have won the game 94% of the time or whatever it is. But the turn prior, he could have nasty plotted on a very, very telegraphed mirror coat turn where he wasn't being super pressured by the Alamomola and won guaranteed with his Tornadus, right? And then, in the same vein, in the game afterwards, he sacked his Archaludon in a turn which he didn't need to, which would have 100% opened up a clear endgame path to where he didn't have to hit a Hurricane to win. He missed the Hurricane and lost to Q. Should have won if he hit the Hurricane, but there were better play paths to get him. And again, you could talk to him about this too. He'll agree, right? Did he get unlucky to lose? 100%. But he understands as a good player that, hey, I could have taken a better and more consistent path to winning this. So yeah, I think this is fair. Hold on, we're at Sharpie Plays. How much more do we got? We got to start moving a little bit because I do have to get ready for work soon. Next we have Sharpie Plays here saying draft with a goal, backup pick, and a backup to your backup. Each and every round, you should ideally have 3 Pokemon you want on your team. In most drafts, you likely get sniped at least once or something, have a backup always. I think this is kind of fair. I think more so what you should take from this is have a plan. I think from round 3 onwards, you should be able to, as someone who struggles with drafting personally, you should have your whole draft planned out damn near from there onwards. Now, if you get sniped, you have a backup, you need to replan completely. It's also not a plug and play like, oh, well, this got sniped, I have this, I can just swap these, the plan still works. It might, but also might not. So I think that's an important aspect of it. Next up, we have Frito here, kind of saying the opposite as Nate here, saying don't leave your team building till the last minute. Get it done early in the week. It gives you time to reflect on it with plenty of time to spare. Prepping last minute will always stress you out in the game. Yeah, for sure. I'm a big believer in this. I have my first build done by Sunday or Monday the week before. Or Monday the week of, or Sunday the day before that Monday. Because it gives me plenty of time to mock, gives me plenty of time to look over the build, be like, oh, actually, I'm thinking about this and changing it. Opposed to right before, you're just not going to have your best product rushing. You're just not going to. Next up, we have Richard, the accountant here, saying build your team with your opponent in mind. Try to come up with your own sets instead of relying on standard ones. Remember that team building and draft is a different exercise when you know exactly who your opponent has to choose from. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with this. I'll be honest. I don't think you build with your opponent in mind. You build with your opponent's team in mind because it's a counter draft format. You don't build with your opponent in mind. You don't build with how they build in mind. You build the best team humanly possible to cover for multiple paths that your opponent can take, but you do not build for your opponent's specific, the way you think your opponent is going to build and play. That leads to way too much variance. It leads to you just getting knocked on your ass if they do anything you didn't expect. Remember, they are going to approach things wildly different than you might think they are. You are not the same person. You're not in the same head. So I don't think that's actually a good idea. I wouldn't recommend that. Your own sets relying on standard ones, that's fine. But again, don't overcomplicate it. Sometimes the standard set might be the best. Next up, we have Seahawks here saying utilize the prep doc. It gives the player a good idea on what moves your opponent is packing based on some tight charts. Definitely utilize the damage calculator as a very useful tool from what sets to run. I think this is a great tweet for this thread, by the way, because while this might be super self-explanatory if you've been playing draft for a minute, if you were brand new, what the hell is a prep doc? What the hell is a calc? Me personally, when I started playing draft, it was my first dive into competitive Pokemon. I can actually tell you guys with a certainty, my first ever Draft League game, I lost to T-Spikes. I didn't even know what T-Spikes were before that game, right? So the prep doc, let me just pull it up on the side real quick, has so many cool tools that maybe a veteran Draft League player isn't going to utilize. Hold on, we're gonna open it up. Obviously, I don't have a league in here or something of the sort, but look, I mean, between having the speed teacher, this is my spring seasonal matchup for this week. Obviously, I can put in, let's say, spring seasonal, same thing. Come on. There we go, giving me a ton of type effectiveness. This is what's doing, this is what I am weak to. This is what my Pokemon are weak to. This might seem very self-explanatory. It shows me what max speed stats are, too, for everything. This might be very self-explanatory to a veteran player, but to a new player, that might be really useful information that they did not know. So 100%. And obviously the damage calculator, same idea. You know, lets you actually calc out and, you know, plan out these sequences and stuff like that. So, yeah, great tip from Seahawks, yeah. Very simple, but that's exactly what you should be doing. Here's Ben here saying, I don't know if I count as a veteran, but honestly play with your favorites. For beginners, whether you build a good or bad team, losing and winning both feel better alongside Pokemon you like using in-game or on ladder. I think to an extent this is fair. When you first start out, draft Pokemon you think are cool and are good. Don't stress too much about your team being absolutely optimal and broken, because you're not going to draft a good team your first couple times. It's just not going to happen. I don't know if long-term I like the idea of play with your favorites, you know? If you are trying to get better and trying to consistently win, that doesn't always mean drafting your absolute favorite guys, because they might not be the best guys, right? I think it depends on what your goals are in draft. It's just to have a good time and play with some fun mods, for sure. Do your thing. Draft your guys. You know, if you really, really like Tangela and you're the Tangela guy who drafts Tangela every draft, hell yeah. But if you're trying to actively get better consistently, drafting the better Pokemon and the better team comps are just going to be the move. Next up here, we have Zethor saying versatility is everything. Not every mon needs it, but most of your team should have it. Don't shun mons that are normally lower tier in Smogon if they seem overpriced. They're probably there for a reason. This is a good shout. Don't kind of equate Smogon knowledge to draft knowledge and vice versa. Versatility is king in draft league. It's okay if Pokemon are one note though, if they are very good at that job, and that's the job you need done though. Next up, we have JK here saying, you can afford to go top heavy because lower tiers are your best friends. There's so much value in 2 to 4 point range in draft. Yeah, again, think this isn't the OU ladder. You can get great value out of your Sableyes of the world. So you can draft super top heavy and get some great roll compression guys at the bottom. A lot of those like low tier guys are great. Rotom Spook, like the electric one, is a big one that I can think of right now as well that I think is really great value. Next up is Potato saying, watch your replays and have your friends watch your replays. Find out what you did wrong and ask yourself why it worked out the way it did. What you find will be different from your friends, and that's a good thing. Yeah, we talked about watching your own replays, but yeah, send it to a buddy. Send it to someone who's better than you. Be like, hey, where did I fuck up here? And they'll tell you. Where did I do good here? They'll tell you, right? So I think it's good. Especially, obviously you gotta make friends with the format, but that's one of the fun parts of the format. Next up, we have Doki the Dingus Wagon Fruit, the goat here, saying, when you prep, start with figuring out how you'll make progress, and it'll lead naturally into how you want to win the game. And if you can, keep from relying on your opponent making a mistake or doing something specific. Analyzing this wrong is okay. It'll help you improve. Yeah, 100%. Don't be afraid to make your own calls and, you know, the builder and, you know, say, like, I think this wins. It might not. You know, you might have made a wrong decision. Like, yo, I think this Lando T wins if I do this, and then you do it and you're like, oh damn, it didn't win. That's how you learn. You're like, okay, I see why. But yeah, start with figuring out how you make progress and then go from there. So 100%, and I 1000% would agree with, don't rely on your opponent making a certain move or mistake or doing something specific. You need to find a way to win with your opponent playing well, as I think a good way of looking at it. Next up, we have Bernie here saying playing in 20 leagues at once doesn't help you improve at all. Taking on fewer leagues and actually putting effort and thought into prep will make you improve massively. 1000%. Quality over quantity, baby. We've talked about it a ton. 6 of you saying make sure you're having fun. People get caught up in the competitives and forget to have fun. I mean, yeah, that's a good general tip, right? I think it's okay to be competitive. I think a lot of the time, like, competitive has like a negative connotation behind it. You need to have a good mindset. Make sure you're still enjoying it though, 1000%. But being competitive doesn't mean you know, you're not having a blast. Next up, we have Ace Jake here saying, I think it's easy for newer players in the community to draft the same mods because they're familiar with them. You really should try and draft unique in different teams in your first few leagues to really fully understand what your what playstyle suits you, and more importantly, what's most fun to you. Yeah, I think finding out if you're a hyper offense player, if you like just playing standard bulky offense, if you like playing stall, you find that out by drafting those teams. If you like playing balance, you find that out by drafting those teams and drafting those Pokemon, and you're going to find new Pokemon that you feel comfortable with after using them because you're like, wow, these are great. Next up, we have Ducky here saying, running three assault vests every week. Me when I'm diet tight. So true. Puppybone here says, don't prep for hours upon hours. You will only overthink the match or get tunnel vision, and then stuff doesn't go to plan and makes it much harder. Also, don't care about drafting any cores. Firewater Grass and Giant Fish Steel are not remotely important in today's drafting metagame. Yeah, the second part we've already talked about. The first part I think is fair. I think drafting for hours, or building for hours cumulatively is good, but not at one time. Get a rough draft going, get a pace, say, okay, this is my team for right now. just come back to this later, whether that be in a mock later, whether that be in a relook at the team, whatever it might be. But sitting there for 3 hours staring at the same pace isn't going to do shit. It's the same thing as studying for a test for like 8 hours straight. You're really not retaining a lot of that information past a certain point. So yeah. Next up, we have Terabyte here saying draft what you want to use. Don't think you have to draft for balancing. Draft to your playstyle. Yeah, I mean, draft to what you want to use is a good tip for like we said, good for newer players. Draft new things and draft guys that you want, understanding that your team might not be great. I don't think draft what you want to use and don't think you have to have a balanced team is a good long-term idea, right? Like, you want to draft good teams. Doesn't mean your playstyle is good. Balance doesn't mean bulky, you know, I have my pivots, blah, blah, blah. It could be hyper offense. You could draft a balanced hyper offense team, right? In the sense of like, its balance is good. But I don't think that, the idea, the first two sentences are great. I think drafting your playstyle is definitely a good one, though. If you know that you're a hyper offense player, draft some hyper offense. If you know you're a stall player, draft some stall. Next up, we have My Chemical Romance here. The band? Whoa. Stop giving things random coverage to hit a few more mons and get some extra damage. Most of the time, you're better off with a reliable stabber utility setup of some kind. All of your mons should still be able to function without getting the perfect matchup, i.e. Dark Pulse Archaludon. It's a good example. Yeah, I think this is something that new players do. You don't need coverage for everything. Every Pokemon isn't going to beat everything. Think, when you're putting coverage on a Pokemon, think, am I ever practically going to click this in the game? And does this move that I have for X Pokemon that typically will switch into me, am I ever going to click it, and do I ever beat this Pokemon 1v1? No? Then it's okay if you're like, okay, my Archaludon loses to X threat. It loses to this Bronzong in a 1v1 scenario. But what I can do is I can Stealth Rock the first time the Bronzong comes in. I can Draco the next time it comes in, it takes 30% and switch out, whereas Draco still hits whatever was in front of me, and I can beat the Bronzong with something else, right? You don't have to have every single Pokemon on your team have tools for every single Pokemon on your opponent's team. You have to make sure you have the app tools for everything on your opponent's team cumulatively, but everything doesn't have to beat everything, because they're not going to, and it leads to clunky teams, right? Leads to really, really clunky teams. You see it in like the hidden power generations often, where you see like a random HP fire from Mega Scizor, and you're like, okay, but you don't beat Mega Scizor. You're never clicking it on the Mega Scizor. Why are we HP fire? You know, opposed to the Stealth Rock that we could have, or something like that. And next up, we have a Crew Kid. I think I'm saying that right. Saying this doesn't often pay off until later in the season, but watch as many replays of other players as possible. You get an idea for their playstyle, Pokemon favorite, and if they run certain sets. Wi-Fi drafts you have left to go off of, but still take a look at used sets. Okay. I agree that you should watch other people's replays, but not for that reason. Again, I am not big on building and playing based on what your opponent's patterns have shown in the past. Like, I really don't agree with that. But I do agree that it's a good idea to watch other people's replays, because you can see what they're good at, and you can see what they're bad at, and you can apply that to your own game. If you're actively trying to get better, not only watching your own replays and analyzing your own mistakes and upsides, do that with other people too, especially people who are really good. If you are in like a server like DPL or like the Small and Draft server, watch DPL and DCL replays, because those guys are really good, and their plays are obviously going to be pretty good in most instances, and you can watch and be like, okay, why did they win? Why did this person lose? What did this person do wrong, and what did this person do right? And I think that's great. I'm big on not playing based on what you think your opponent is going to do, because their game plan could be completely different. They could realize, I need to be so aggressive in this game to win, so I'm going to make crazy plays, and then they get a matchup against you, and they're like, I don't need to in this matchup, you know? And vice versa. Next up, we have Axel here. I'm just going to say Axel, because Axel's the end. I could be wrong. Think through each turn of the battle from your opponent's perspective as well as your own. While this helps with predictions, it also opens the door to long-term thought. By doing this, you can overcome average or subpar prep and /or a bad matchup. It'll still be hard though. Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like, very often people will bring like a neat tech coverage move for a Pokemon with like a lure barrier, and they're like, okay, my opponent has to scout for this, I'm gonna make a double. The opponent doesn't, and you're like, why didn't you switch? Well, from their perspective, they don't know you have that move, right? They don't know, or like from their perspective, you could be like a lead scenario, right? Where like, you're leading Landorus, and they're leading Neolego, and this is Gen 7. You hard switch out because you're like, okay, Hidden Power Ice can kill me because I'm offensive. They could also be like, oh no, what if he's Choice Scarf? I'm not Scarf Neolego. I need to switch out here because I freaking die, right? Or like, it could be an instance of you lead Metagross into a Landorus Therian. They don't know if you're Shook a Berry or not, so they're probably not going to stay in Earthquake you and then just die to Ice Punch. They might just U-turn out immediately, right? So just things to keep in mind. I think understanding that your opponent has a different perspective from you is definitely a smart thing to think of. Next up, we have Eric here saying, don't overthink your team prep. It's very easy to spend ages on it and be sure you know exactly what your opponent's sets will bring and trying to vision yourself into missing problem. Yep, we talked about this before. Don't need to sit there for 3 hours. Get a team pace done, come back to it later. Next up, Anton here is familiarize yourself with the most important roles and how to compress roles. Also, make sure you have diverse speed tiers. It matters. Yeah, we don't want people to be able to run adamant modest on their Pokemon. So usually having something in between those 15 jump tiers, like having something in between 95 and 110 so that 110 can't run, adamant modest versus you is really nice. Next up, we have Moses here saying draft stall. It works out every time. It's so true. It actually doesn't most times. I think you actually have to be a very, very good player to play stall. Who is a great example? Another draft league, staple all time, Theodore Monty, incredible stall player, probably the best draft stall player of all time. Very, very good. I think it's really hard to make it work. Except we have Devin really saying, please do not pick Ford. This is a great tip for new draft league play. In my first draft league ever, I drafted a Fortress. I won 3 games that season. So, I learned. Next up, we have, I almost said Maximilian. There's no X there. Go into a draft with a plan. A lot of my draft league fans, y'all have a plan. I often say y'all have a plan. It can be kind of tough since you might get sniped, but realistically, you can only get sniped a couple times in the draft. And you might get sniped more, but you can make a new plan. So you should always have a plan at all times. Otherwise, if you're drafting round by round, once you get to a certain point, now I don't think you should have a plan from round 1. I think people who say they get sniped round 1 are lying or dumb. But from round 3, 4 onwards, you should have a bona fide plan, a complete plan. Next up is Kyle Ward saying draft rain, it works every time. So if I draft rain and it works every time and stall drafts every time, what if I draft rain stall? Does that mean I will literally never lose? Think about it. I think it might be the case. Next up is Sadawuda saying, don't forget to have fun. Doesn't matter if it's with Funky Sense or just using mons you like. Find some ways to have fun. You'll lose a lot more games if you get burnt out. Also find some friends to prep with. Friends make it more fun too. I think this is a very wholesome way to kind of almost round out this. It should be enjoyable. I think a lot of times, especially I think back to when I first started. Again, I think I won 3 games my first draft league season. But I remember my first win, my second, my third win. I was pumping my fist in the air, and when I lost, I was like, damn, you got me. Now it's almost okay, I win, cool, I was supposed to. I don't feel anything. I lose, and I got a bottle of whiskey, and I'm crying in the shower. You know what I mean? That's not how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to enjoy the entire process. Feel happy when you win, and be okay when you lose. I think it's building with friends is obviously a great way to get better. And a way to make it a lot more fun. Next up, we have Kyle Savage here saying, K Savage, the GOAT, saying, don't let a loss affect your mental state. I've seen this happen I've seen this happen to too many friends over a game. Go back and break stuff down. Learn from it and do not let it affect your day. Yeah, remove yourself. If it's really frustrating to lose, which, again, I'm the same way, I literally will get off my computer. I'll be okay, let's not sit and fester in this. And when I don't, is when I start talking shit and I start getting angry and I start, I think it's great. Just remove yourself from the scenario, the situation. Then we have Know the Numbat, another GOAT, saying, have fun, draft mods try something new, reach out, make friends. I think this is a great, nice and wholesome way to end it off, just like Sadawuda's and Kyle's here. These are a little bit more mindset things. This is supposed to be an enjoyable format. I find it enjoyable. You should too. And you should, play and, approach it in that way, as if this is a fun thing for you. So if you guys did enjoy today's draft league discussion on how to get better in the format if you're a new player, be sure to drop a like on the video, as well as subscribe to the channel on our way to 10K. Again, I'd really appreciate it. I'll see you guys next time.